Hello and good evening, class. My name is Austin Fennel. Tonight I'll be showing you my contemporary business leader presentation, who I interviewed, which business leader I compared them to, and so on and so forth. So let's get right into it. The person I decided to interview is my grandfather, Felins Marion. He was a former homicide detective SWAT officer who was part of the Omaha Police Department here in my city of Omaha, Nebraska from 1981 to 2005. He was in charge of many officers. Fortunately, can't give a specific amount. If any of you have served in the military before or have experience in law enforcement, you kind of know that you supervise numerous officers. From a military perspective, you would supervise about a platoon, which would be about 30 men, roughly. Being in SWAT teams like he was, you can operate in a 12-man team. You can go in homicide, it's usually only two of you. However, going through the academy and stuff like that, officers, they start as street cops, move on up, and if they have a supervisor role, then they will, adhere to most people. I know, at least here for Omaha, how if an officer is put in a supervisor role, usually he has control of about 10 cars, and that can depend on how many officers are inside, and he has control over them because they are in different spots of the area. Where I live at in Omaha, we're separated by two counties. It's Sarpy and Douglas, so there's multiple cars to cover that area. Anyway, getting on with it. As we move here, what was his greatest achievement? So now, speaking to my grandfather, he had a lot on his mind. However, in his opinion, his greatest achievement was called Operation Papercut. He worked with the U.S. Marshals and Omaha Police Department of Douglas County, and Douglas County Sheriffs as well, Sarpy County Sheriffs, and their whole job was to stop a shoplifting ring that was happening at the time. The shoplifters were sending merchandise back to Kansas City that they would steal here. They were hitting anything from a gas station, liquor store, going into the malls, Walmarts, you name it. They were everywhere at any time, any place, and they were hitting every store possible, sending stuff back to Kansas City that they would then flip and resell it for profit. Usually what that entails is money laundering. That also entails fake bills and stuff like that too. Counterfeit usually is what that entails. So, as it says here, they recovered over $2 million worth of merchandise, and it helped in the arrest of 36 people. When it comes to management strategies, especially for this, when we talk about it, like management strategy, you want to have your planning, your organizing, and then you want to be able to lead organizational resources. In his case, he was able to do that. He was put in charge of said operation, and at this time, we'll get into it later, but at this time, Omaha's police network really wasn't that cohesive. Everybody had their own kind of areas. However, because every store in the area in the metro was getting hit, they all had to come together. So he was able to coordinate two sheriff departments of two different counties, the Douglas County Police themselves, Omaha Police Department, and work with U.S. Marshals themselves. That right there is a logistical feat in and of itself. He said it was his best achievement because, like I said earlier, it was his ability to be able to coordinate the operation, and it followed in the teamwork that followed, brought together different specialities of everybody that he worked with. So, the marshals were able to cross over into different jurisdictions to get people, worked with his SWAT unit guys, of course, worked with the guys in Sarpy County who did things a little bit differently than Douglas County. So we'll continue on here. Go to the significant challenges. When he was talking to me and I asked him, my grandfather's African American. So you can imagine at that time, being his age, racism was unfortunately still a big deal at the time. But his biggest challenge, he said, that he faced was communication. As I was stating earlier with his greatest achievement, when it came to communication, everybody operated on different frequencies. Everybody had different jurisdictions. So if you were part of Douglas County and you were chasing somebody, you could not cross over into Sarpy County, which covers 3 different other cities here in Nebraska. Omaha is the bigger city. There's other sub-cities right beneath it. However, we just call ourselves the Metro because we all center around Omaha. In that case, that was a big, big problem. And nowadays, it's not so much of an issue, but you can imagine back then, with people saying, hey, I'm chasing a guy, and he crosses over into a different county or different state, you're going to have a little bit more of an issue there. Unlike if you were a U.S. Marshal, you don't necessarily have to follow those problems. And then he told me about his second challenge. He was torn between these two. For him, the communication was the biggest issue, but also the racism part too was another big issue. He could not necessarily pick one, so I decided to include both. For him, during this time, as back in the 80s and 90s, racism was still a thing. If you guys all know history, in 1992, the race riots in LA were a big problem due to police brutality. My grandfather being an African American and being a cop who grew up in the impoverished areas of South Omaha, it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Family, friends, you can imagine. And when he was in charge of people, a lot of guys that came in from the academy were white, a lot of new guys, and they didn't want to listen to someone who was black and had a authority position over them. My grandfather did state, however, that keeping a level head and a sense of understanding are the keys to pushing forward. And I agree with this. I do agree with this because I think if you have that understanding that, hey, it does suck that racism is a thing in this world, but as long as you can kind of, all right, it's taught, someone taught this person that down the line, I'll be able to push through it, or, hey, this guy may have some family issues, kind of want to understand that, It's things that I had to deal with as well in my current job and in my old job as well. Keep pushing here. We'll go to the mission statement. So, as a police officer, protect and serve, right? Pretty straightforward, especially the community. He, on the other hand, he had a personal mission. He wanted to set an example for our family and our friends that lived in the ghetto of South Omaha. He wanted to show that it was possible. Wanted to show that, hey, just because you're black does not mean you can't get out of this area and make something of yourself. It doesn't mean, hey, you can't join the force. There was very rarely any African American police officers when he joined back in 1981. According to the Omaha Police Department themselves, their own mission is the Omaha Police Department, in partnership with our community, provides impartial, transparent, ethical, and professional law enforcement service and guardianship. We strive to maintain the trust and confidence of our citizens and employees while working to improve the quality of life. Pretty straightforward. The lessons and attributes necessary for success. When I asked my grandfather, what kind of lessons did you learn? His first lesson he said he learned was the ability to read an audience, to read the room, if you will. When conducting investigations, whether you're serving a warrant or whether you're kicking in a door or, interrogation, or if you're just walking down the street and you're asking questions. You need to understand the people around you. You need to know how to talk to them. This is extremely important in the business world today, and this goes for any type of business. If you ask me, you don't have to necessarily be a police officer. If you don't know how to start a conversation with your employees or just with people in general, it can be a little bit hard to get the information you need or to get the compliance that you need for someone to complete a job. If you just kind of show up, hey, I'm your boss, so do what I tell you, an employee may or may not comply. However, if you kind of start off with, hey, my name's so-and-so, nice to meet you, how you doing, da-da-da-da-da, you, in a sense, get to know the individual. That can provide a little bit better understanding of one another, and it can also almost guarantee that employee will comply with what you need to do. The second lesson that he learned was body language. Body language is another very important facet of the business world and also just in general. When it comes to body language, right? If someone's talking to you and, and you're in a sense have your back turned to them or you're turned to the side, like this in a sense, that shows that you don't necessarily care what they say and you're not listening. If you were in an interview and you did that and you were trying to get hired, you would necessarily not get hired. People are going to notice that. They look for these things. Body language was important for him when being a cop because it understood who he was talking to. If someone was a gang member, could kind of get the body language from them, how they walk, how they talk, how they act, certain things. Another thing would be when conducting interrogations, body language and facial expressions and all that give off guilt, regret, happiness, joy, sadness. It gives off all these emotions. So to read that body language, it can make and break, or it can make or break, an investigation, and it can lead to the conviction of someone who you have as a suspect, if they're guilty or not guilty. He said what did hinder his career and hinder his progression, though, was politics. He said staying out of politics and who has the power was the biggest thing. According to him, if things had been less political, it could have made the differences in cases. I do think this is a problem, even in today's world. We look at it, whether it has to deal with racism, whether it has to be with red or blue states, does not matter. As long as the politics are kept, maybe in the personal level on the home front, then and not bringing it to work, you may have an easier time going, in a sense. The best way I can describe this is my time in the military. Politics were not really something you talked about in the military. You did, but you were sworn to obey the President of the United States, regardless of who sat in office. So 9 times out of 10, you held your reservations in and you kept it pushing. So we get to the business leader. So who did I choose for my business leader? Well, I chose a guy named Kenneth Frazier. In my opinion, he's a perfect comparison to my grandfather. Kenneth was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in a deeply impoverished area, December 17th, 1954. If you guys don't know, Philly is one of those very impoverished areas in the United States, such as Detroit, LA, New York City. The list goes on. His parents greatly encouraged him to be a hardworking person and to go to school so that way he has what it takes to succeed. Mr. Frazier now is a lawyer, pharmaceutical executive, and a corporate general counsel. And if you ask me, those are very, very, very high accomplishments. So, a little more about him. So, as a lawyer, he worked in many cases. However, the case that brought Frazier the most praise during this time was the pro bono work he contributed to freeing the innocent Willie Bo Cochran after 21 years on death row. Now, I'm sure some of you have seen or heard that there have been those convicted and put on death row who never did it, and sadly the evidence doesn't come to pass till years later. This is huge. A lot of people make the argument in cases that why are so many African Americans the ones on death row, and it is sad. It is very sad. And Kenneth Frazier is an African American, and for him to be a lawyer and to take these types of steps to make it known, hey, you have a voice, even though you're on death row, and if you're very convinced that you never did this crime, then I'm going to fight for you. That's something that resonates with people. That's someone that we all need, to represent us in the community and also just in the world in general. If you had a manager that came through and was like, hey, I'm going to represent you no matter what. I care about you guys. You guys are my people. You guys are my coworkers. When you have that level of understanding with not only your employees, but that of maybe upper management as well, it does show the bond that you guys can create to create a well-oiled machine to keep it ongoing. In 1992, he accepted a position at Merck & Co. and worked for them in many ways. But in 2007, he accepted the role as president, and in 2011, he became the CEO, making him the first African American to be CEO of a major pharmaceutical company. So, Mr. Frazier has been a staple in the community in Philly, and that during his time he served on many community boards and boards of several different organizations. Said organizations include ExxonMobil, Penn State University, and the Cornerstone Christian Academy. While he had such a great effect on the people in the Philadelphia community, and he was so well recognized, and he had so much professional success, he was selected to lead the sexual abuse case of one Jerry Sandusky. If you guys don't know who Jerry Sandusky is, he was a head coach at Penn State University, and was convicted of, molesting younger children. This is a very sad case, and this was a pretty big deal because Jerry Sandusky was a staple corner of Penn State University. He was a head coach, football and everything. So, why did I choose him, right? So why did I choose Kenneth Frazier's leadership comparison, right? Why did I? Mr. Frazier, being an African American, is someone that anyone can look up to, especially the black community, right? As back what I said before, my grandfather, when he joined the police force, right, he also wanted to make an impact for the community in South Omaha. As back then, South Omaha was a predominantly African American community, as stated there. My grandfather being a police officer, Mr. Frazier being a lawyer, they also wanted to help their communities out and protect and serve in their own way by doing what is right and providing law and order. So, Mr. Frazier, putting those who are guilty behind bars. My grandfather out there in the streets arresting those who are convicted of crimes, protect and serve, right? So, while they both work in different fields and perform different actions, they still have those similarities. Both of them grew up in impoverished communities, right? So, leadership style. So, my grandfather's leadership style is more of a task-oriented, right? Task-oriented is more so for the people of the first responders and more of your military. That's more of who you'll see in that style of leadership. According to our textbook, right, it states that the primary purpose of task-oriented behaviors is to assist others in accomplishing their goals and those of a work unit. So, this right here, exactly. So, you have a task, it needs to get done, right? So for my grandfather, him being a police officer, he was able to go there, help out what needs to get helped out, and complete said task. Usually, this would have to deal with an officer calling for backup, assisting those in order to accomplish the goal. Officer needs help arresting somebody, he's going to call for backup shows up. In Mr. Frazier's case, he was more of an idealized influence style. And what this means was he was so well liked and he had such a high standing, he was able to instill pride in his workers. They saw him and they were like, hey, Mr. Frazier's a great guy. He does all this stuff, right? Was a lawyer. He's very into his community. He's on the board of several different organizations. I like this guy, right? Now, both have their pros and cons, right? If you're more task-oriented, you may lack in some of the other styles. And if you're more idolized, then you may have some other flaws as well. Leadership lessons. For the characteristics of leadership worksheet that we had to do, my grandfather exhibited quite a high score when it came to the scoring sheet. Most of this is due to the nature of being a police officer, as servant leadership and an entrepreneurial mindset are very key when it comes to this, as they all focus on multiple facets of being a good leader. The reason why these play a factor is because as a police officer, they take an oath to protect and serve, and they understand the people that they interact with. So when it comes to, the big five personality or having empathy, right, or, awareness and everything, he scored very, very high on those. In some other ones, such as healing, not so much. Scored very low. Healing more for an officer was more of the type of concept of, if someone was injured, then they would provide first aid. However, they do consult people when a crime does happen. For example, those who are rape victims, when they have to get interviewed by police, usually 9 times out of 10 the police will consult them and give them comfort, before paramedics get there. So, leadership lessons. The three behaviors that I believe one needs is empowering leadership, servant leadership, and ethical leadership. So, these are extremely important because they allow one to show empathy and understanding for individuals who are in a workforce. It also allows motivation for service. This also allows for motivation, service, and empathy, which in today's world are very needed now more than ever. So, ever since COVID, guys, there's been a decrease in the work community. A lot of guys will stay home and work from home, or a lot of them are sitting here still collecting a check from the government and not ever have to work again. In my time in the military, these were very, very huge. For us, especially my job, I was in the infantry, so I trained to fight a war. For us, it was super critical to have these types of steps, right? You needed to have the ethical standpoint because when you went over there and you had to do a job that, was in a sense fighting a war, you had to have good morals and bad morals. They played together and they always coincided with each other, but you needed to have your ethics, so you needed to know what's right and wrong. That way you don't commit war crimes. That way you're not doing illegal things to still keep your humanity, right? Now, war is hell. It's going to happen. But having your ethics there and still having that ethical leadership there and those behind you understand that, you'll be able to show comfort, empathy, understanding, healing in a time where everybody is hurting and not wanting to fight, right? So, we'll move on here to the reflection. So, why did I choose him, right? So, I chose my grandfather because I currently work for the DoD at an Air Force base here in Omaha, Nebraska. I was in the Marine Corps for 4 years. I served in the infantry, and the goal one day for me is to join Homeland Security after graduating from GCU. I wanted to get his input from the law enforcement perspective. As for Homeland Security, it's more so going to be law enforcement. I worked with Homeland Security for 3 months. I was attached to them while I was in the Marine Corps. We were down there at the border mission, and we helped them run observation and surveillance down there at the border, helping them catch people who crossed over, stopping guns, narcotics, trafficking, you name it, preventing the cartel from doing what they needed to do. While both of us are veterans, it's a lot easier to understand. I don't know if any of you have family members, friends, husbands, wives, boyfriends, girlfriends who are veterans, but when they have that community and there's people who are veterans, regardless of the age, it's a lot easier to understand each other because we've been there, we've done that, we understand. It's not so much that we don't trust what civilians say or what the outside perspective is. It's more so it's just, hey, they get us, they understand us. It would be like, I couldn't necessarily speak on being a doctor because I'm not a doctor, but if I knew somebody who was and they spoke with their colleagues who also were doctors or friends who were doctors, they would understand each other more. With the career that I want to achieve, absolutely, I spoke to him, and that is partially the reason why. Here are the references here, guys. End of this video here, I will put a link to this so you guys will be able to watch the video and see it. Thank you so much, and you guys have a good night.